Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my standard review of the new Sony 14mm F1.8 G Master lens. And this is a truly exceptional wide-angle lens that does something not that it has never been done before. A few years back, 2017, Sigma released a 14mm f1.8 lens. However, that lens was some 27 millimeters longer, and on top of that, it weighed in nearly 1,200 grams, while this lens comes in obviously significantly smaller and weighing only 460 grams. That makes it a radically different proposition for how it's going to be used and where it can be taken along. 14 millimeters is a focal length that I love. It produces really dynamic images, and while it does require you to kind of recalibrate your composition and your eye for photography, it allows you to produce really stunning images. And anything wider than this, I find that you start to lose some of the magical quality to me, to where images just become a little too extreme. So this is kind of a sweet spot for ultra wide angle photography, at least in my mind. I've reviewed a number of 14mm lenses over the years. I think the first one was about 8 years ago when I reviewed a manual focus Samyang Rokinon 14mm f2.8, and I've reviewed a number since that point, but it's a focal length that I continue to love, and I hope that you'll see why during the course of this review, and maybe see why this lens is probably the best yet at this focal length. Now today I'm doing the standard review. If you want more detail, you can check out the definitive review, and particularly a deeper dive into the image quality and performance on that front. So first of all, as I've already noted, this is a lens that, while being very compact, it is a premium lens in every sense. It starts with coming with a nice carrying case that comes with the G Master lenses. It has a thorough weather sealing that begins at the lens mount where there's a gasket. Then there's about 8 other seal points around the rings, around the switches, and then there's a flooring coating on the front element that helps to protect it. Now, speaking of that front element, this, like all of these ultra wide angle lenses, this has a bulbous front element, and so it necessitates having a fixed lens hood, and it precludes the use of traditional screw-in filters. Now, obviously that becomes a liability for any of these ultra wide angle lenses, in that you're going to have an alternate filtering solution if you want to use filters. Now, Sony has made some allowance for that, in that there is a rear gel filter mount holder there. Gel filters are not particularly useful, I think, to most of us photographers, in that they tend to be very low quality. They're kind of just cutting out a piece of a sheet, basically, and inserting them. But fortunately, already there's an aftermarket solution that is ready to go from Haida, a filter maker, and I detail this more in the definitive review if you want to check that out. But it's a pretty simple process. There's about 3 screws that need to be released around the mount here that will release the standard Sony filter holder, and then with those same 3 screws you can tighten in the Haida filter holder. And then the Haida filter holder allows you to use high quality glass filters that are going to be very useful and allow you to get really dynamic type images. And so it's a fairly elegant solution in some ways. It's small, it's portable, it is high quality, but liability for rear filters is, of course, you've got to take the lens off to insert the filters, so there's always some risk of that in the field. And there is no option really for polarizing in this kind of situation, because a polarization filter has to be rotated. I will say this, however, it's often not recommended to use polarizing filters on lenses this wide, because you get the field of view is so wide that you get an uneven polarization in the sky, for example. And so that's something to consider. I'm sure that there will, however, be some kind of front mount filter, square filter systems in the future. But that is just one liability that, fortunately does have some solutions. We have the GM approach to features, and so that gives you a multifaceted approach to aperture control. You can either have a clicked aperture with 1/3 stop to tense. There's a switch there where you can declick the aperture and just smoothly rack through various aperture options, or you can put it all the way over into automatic mode and just control from within the camera. It has the focus hold button along with the AF/MF switch to give you control, and the manual focus ring. It moves smoothly and it is linear in nature, so it gives you repeatable results. I do find that it's a little on the light side for me in terms of damping. I would prefer just a little more resistance and feel to be a part of the ring, but it works and functions just fine. The other aspect of having that fixed lens hood is that the lens cap itself is not going to be a smaller type, that pinches in, but rather it's one that fits over the top of the lens hood. Not a big deal because this is a reasonably compact lens. However, it is quite a bit deeper than your traditional lens cap, so it doesn't fit quite as well in a pocket or some other place where you're going to stow it when you want to pop it off. So just something there to bear in mind. The overall lens itself is right under 100 millimeters in length. It is 83 millimeters in diameter and, as noted, weighs only 460 grams. There are 9 rounded aperture blades inside, and while Sony's apertures are really great at retaining a circular shape, truth of the matter is that with a lens this wide, you're not going to have a lot of opportunities to create bokeh with the lens stopped down, so I wouldn't be too stressed about that. What I did note, however, is that the lens does produce really nice looking sunburst or sunstar effects when you stop it down to smaller apertures, and so that's always a really great touch to a wide angle lens, and so kudos to Sony on that. I will also note that it has their most recent coatings, and those coatings are super effective, making this lens very highly flare resistant, and so that's also a fantastic aspect of this. Now the lens can focus down as close as 25 centimeters, and so that it leaves you with a fairly low 0.10 times magnification. And so, as I said, you don't expect there to be a lot of situations where you can create a lot of separation of your subject from the background. This was my favorite shot, and it kind of works because it gives you the context of the overall scene. And here is another one that I liked, just again because more that it doesn't completely defocus the background, but rather allows something to stand out within the context of a broader scene. So I like that aspect of it, but if you're buying a lens to be a bokeh maker, even though Sony says that the bokeh is great from the lens, of course they're going to say that, but this really isn't a lens you buy for what's out of focus, but rather for the fact that everything is pretty much in focus. And so as you can see here at infinity, I can shoot at f1.8 and then the same shot at f5.6, and as you can see here, depth of field seems pretty much the same. In fact, you can tell that everything in both the foreground and the background is in focus, and that's really the advantage of a lens like this, is that you can shoot at wider apertures, but because the lens itself has such a wide focal length, you get a very deep depth of field. And so that allows you to shoot in maybe low light conditions and still get a lot of detail and a lot of depth of field to your images. So don't buy the lens for shallow depth of field, buy it because you can get a deep depth of field, and that's the advantage of a lens like this. The autofocus system comes down to 2 linear motors that drive the focusing group, and focus is incredibly fast, it is incredibly quiet, and it is very, very accurate. Now don't expect there to be as much tracking of the eye or the face in terms of what you see on screen, because with such a wide angle of view, it's going to be very rare that the eye occupies enough of the frame to show up. What's going to matter more is that you get accurately focused results, and as you can see here, as the lens tracks me as I approach the camera and move away from it, it smoothly does that and gives consistently well-focused results. That was my experience in other instances as well, and I got very consistently good focusing results. Let's take a look at the focusing pulls that show you also how quiet autofocus is in a video environment. So yeah, some of those kind of environmental sounds almost sound like bombs going off because everything is so quiet here when autofocus is taking place. So this is a fantastic autofocus system, and I think that Sony's recent linear motors that have been on their high-end lenses, they have produced autofocus that is as good or better as anything that I have seen before for any system. This is top of the heap autofocus performance, so kudos to Sony on that. Likewise, this is a lens that is incredibly sharp even at f1.8. It's fairly remarkable how that they've actually managed to slightly better Sigma's image quality performance from their much larger lens with similar maximum aperture and focal length. They managed to get slightly better image quality results while having such an incredibly compact lens relatively. And so I'm really impressed by what they've been able to accomplish on that front. And so that bears out in that the lens has only a small amount of barrel distortion. It has some vignette, about 2.5 stops in the corner, but both of those things correct quite easily. No major problems there. And I also found that in the real world, where I wasn't so close to a test chart, that neither of those things really stood up as strongly, particularly the distortion. And as you can see from this real world shot, the lines are really quite good in the shot itself. And so I don't have a lot of real concerns about that. Likewise, if I take a look at the facade of this church building and zoom in there, you can see that everything is, distortion is minimal there in that kind of setting. So kudos to them on that front. It also does a great job of controlling aberrations, be they longitudinal or lateral along the edges of the frame. Those aberrations are well controlled, so you don't really see any kind of fringing anywhere. And so that produces images that are very crisp and sharp, even from f1.8 on. And so as you stop down, you get a little bit more sharpness, a little bit better contrast, but you're largely getting exceptional performance even wide open. And by f8, you essentially have a flawless, the MTFs basically look almost like a straight line right across the top, which shows you that from the center right out to the very periphery of the frame, the lens is really sharp. It produces really great color. There's just, as I said, there's a dynamism to the images itself that I really love, and I suspect you will as well. And so really no liabilities to point to there. I wasn't able, because of weather conditions, to test astrophotography. We had overcast skies basically every night during my review period, but I was in on a Sony press briefing before the lens was released, and they demonstrated astro performance, and it looked very good. And so I suspect that's the case. It would be consistent with other things that I've seen thus far. And so, I mean, all told, you've got really fantastic image quality out of the lens. Good flare resistance, good control of aberrations, great detail and contrast, beautiful color. This is a lens that really does produce on so many levels. And so at the end of the day, it really comes down to how much you need a lens like this. This is obviously going to very rarely be someone's first choice as a focal length, and it tends to be one that you either need or you don't need something that extreme. And if you need it and you've got the money, this is, I think, the best option on the market. But, as I noted, if you have the money. This is a lens that retails for just a hair under $1,700 US. So it's an expensive lens for maybe not an oft-used focal length for many people. So for some people, it will be a no-fly for them. They just don't need it enough to spend that kind of money. It's a lot of money. However, relative to the competition, this lens is actually fairly aggressively priced, believe it or not. The Sigma, a third-party lens that is not nearly as good as this lens on so many levels, it actually cost $1 more than this. And so that tells you that Sony was aggressive in their pricing. Furthermore, I noted that looking back at, say, Canon's EF 14mm F2.8 L Mark II, that lens still retails for $2,100 US, even though it was released in 2007. And likewise, Nikon has a similar lens that retails for around $1,900. So, I mean, Sony has actually priced this cheaper than, earlier professional grade lenses, even though it has a 1 1/3 stop larger, wider, faster, brighter maximum aperture. And so that tells me that Sony has really worked to deliver a lens that is just better than lenses before of this kind. It's lighter, it's more compact, it has better image quality, better autofocus, and a better price. So at the end of the day, again, if you need the lens and you've got the money, this is a no-brainer. The new Sony FE 14mm f1.8 G Master lens is a winner. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my text review. Check things out in detail there. There's also linkage to an image gallery, which I recommend that you check out because, as I said, 14mm images are fun. And beyond that, there are buying links if you'd like to purchase one for yourself. There's also linkage there to purchase my merchandise, a lot of great options there, and lens-themed gear if you want to check that out. There's also linkage there to follow me on social media, to become a patron, to sign up for my newsletter that comes out every Thursday, and of course, if you haven't already, please click that subscribe button right here on YouTube. Make sure to ring that bell so you get notifications when new content drops. Thanks for watching, have a great day, and let the light in.